where you are. My name is Robert Eriksson. I work with corporate communication, investor relations for Africa Energy, and I do that together with my colleague Sophia Shane in Vancouver. I'm based in Stockholm, and that's where I log in from today. As you know, a lot of you know at least, we used to hold these presentations as in-person meetings in Stockholm, and due to the COVID-19 situation, we can no longer do that. But I think this virtual forum is a very good way for shareholders and potential shareholders to get an update about the company. So today it's Africa Energy, and to say the least, the company is at a very exciting point in time with the ongoing drilling campaign offshore South Africa. We will take questions as you have them through the Q&A function in the bottom of the screen. So you just enter your question and we will collect them and put them to Garrett Soden, the CEO of Africa Energy, at the end of the presentation. So don't be shy about asking questions. They will be answered, hopefully during the presentation or after. So with that, I would like to hand over to Africa Energy's CEO, Garrett Soden.
Thank you, Robert. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our virtual presentation. I'm here to tell you about why you should buy the stock ahead of our drilling results over the next few weeks. As Robert said, it's a very exciting time for the company. We spud the Leopard well with Total offshore South Africa at the end of August, and we also recently announced a transaction to more than double our interest in that block. And we recently closed a $28 million financing. So we're fully funded now for a string of high impact exploration wells over the next several months that can more than double our net asset value. There's been a lot of speculation in the press about declining demand for oil and gas around the focus on environmental concerns and the COVID crisis and the transition of the major oil companies into broader energy companies. We're contrarian in the respect that we believe this plays an even greater role for independent explorers like Africa Energy. When the ultimate supply crunch comes, we believe there's going to be a lot of upside for us in the next price cycle. And we believe we're very well differentiated from other small explorers in three key ways. Number one, of course, is the Lundin Group ownership. They own almost 50% of the shares and have been very supportive in all of our capital requirements. Number two is our technical team from South Africa that has had so much success through Energy Africa and Tullow, and now at Africa Energy, exploring all across Africa. And the third is, of course, our world-class assets. The most important right now being Block 11B, 12B, where we are drilling with Total offshore South Africa. And I think this is a very important project for Total. They made a heroic effort to get this Odfjell deep sea Stavanger rig that you see on the cover from Norway down to South Africa during the lockdown recently, during the COVID crisis. And they're drilling on schedule in a very impressive operation that we're going to tell you about. Quick overview of the company. You can see that we have three assets between Namibia and South Africa, well diversified across three different basins, two different play types, all in proven hydrocarbon systems. And we have both prospective and contingent resources. You can also see we're very well covered by equity research analysts between Oslo and London. 6 analysts. I think that's rare for a company our size. At June 30th, we had about $26 million of cash and no debt. We've since, again, raised $28 million. And when you calculate what we've spent in Q3 on the drilling program, we're still today around $40 million of cash and no debt. A little bit of history about the company. Africa Energy was spun out of Africa Oil, another Lundin Group company, in 2015 as a new ventures vehicle. The idea was to give the former Tullow technical team a platform to chase high-impact frontier exploration across Africa. And you can see this was a technically driven strategy across these various basins, chasing the 2 play types, the stratigraphic trap play and the rift basin play that our technical team has been successful with in the past. In addition to the geology, we were also looking to be in countries that are politically stable and have very good commercial terms. You can see here that in South Africa and Namibia, we have among the best commercial terms in Africa, of course, because these are frontier locations that are trying to encourage foreign investment in the oil and gas sector. We wanted to focus on the offshore. We believe that's easier to develop, easier to monetize. You don't run into some of the issues and delays that we see onshore with land issues, pipelines, borders, etc. So we like the offshore, and we like being in minority, non-operated working interests. Today we have, again, 3 assets, all offshore between Namibia and South Africa, and we're no longer looking at new ventures because we have 2 discoveries on our blocks in South Africa, and we now have a series of prospects where we can prove up additional resource and monetize. We're not in this to be in a long, expensive development with major oil companies. We're in this like a classic small explorer to prove up as much resource as we can and monetize over the next 6 to 12 months. The first differentiator I mentioned was the Lundin Group ownership, and many of you are familiar with the Lundin family from Sweden. They are the major shareholder in 14 different publicly traded companies, usually listed in Toronto and Stockholm in both the mining and the oil and gas E&P sectors. Combined market cap, almost $20 billion. We are one of the smallest companies in the group, but I believe we have the most upside. The second differentiator I mentioned was our team. And that, of course, starts with our board, our non-executive directors here. You can see we have all representatives from the natural resources sector, Adam, Keith, and Ian from the Lundin Group, and John Bentley as an independent director. He built up Energy Africa with our technical team and sold it to Tullow for $500 million in 2004. So all have significant experience creating value in the natural resources sector. In terms of management, Jeremy and I have been in the Lundin Group for a long time in various vehicles, but our key differentiator is our technical team led by Jan Meyer, and I'd like him to join and introduce himself and take you through his track record.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. I'm proud to actually present to you. It's been interesting to discuss the history. My history has been quite long, 30 years plus in the business, and essentially I've been involved in exploration in Africa all that time. Initially with PetroSA, which is a local company, which we started exploring for gas and oil here locally in South Africa, and we had some minor little oil fields that were later developed. And can you go to the next slide, Jeremy? Sorry, Garrett, next slide. And what happened thereafter, I joined a company called Energy Africa, as Garrett mentioned, and we started exploring in Africa. They gave us some latitude to look at new areas. And the success we had was the Leopard discovery in Equatorial Guinea back in '99. That was the first opening of the submarine fan play offshore Africa that we were involved in. And thereafter, we moved to Ghana, where we also were involved in the Jubilee field, where history in terms of what was discovered there, very large resources, 1 billion barrels in 2007. That acreage was secured with Energy Africa. And we also secured the Africa onshore, which is around Uganda, the Albertine Graben. We secured that as Energy Africa. In 2004, there was a transaction where we were sold to Tullow Oil. We, as the team, stayed on, and we then joined Africa Oil in exploring in Kenya. So we had those basins we opened. The western basins were related to submarine fan type play, which we are looking at with the discovery we've had offshore South Africa. The other two are rift plays, which are associated with the kind of play we are looking at in Block 2B. And then most recently, the discovery we had in the Padafisi fairway, of course, in 2019, where we had the discovery of Brulpada, and very exciting for the South African offshore exploration here. And obviously, it's made a huge impression in terms of being a game changer that we have here offshore South Africa. So in terms of the team, I've had the team with me all that time. They've moved with me. Lundin was supportive in getting those guys into our group. And we've been involved in trying to delineate these areas where we have low risk, trying to find new oil. So we've been very fortunate. Looking at our portfolio, essentially we'll start at the bottom. Pearl 37 was a block where we drilled a well in 2018. Unfortunately, it wasn't, but we did prove the play, so the concept is there. And what we're trying to do in this particular area is we will watch the operators. We have Total drilling Venus in the south, and so is Shell going to be drilling an exploration well in Pearl 39. And we'll probably have two other operators drilling in the Walvis Basin, either Exxon or Moral and Prom. So we are just going to see what comes out of those results, and we'll then decide our next move in terms of our strategy. Block 2B, we have now successfully farmed down to a company called Azinam, who will be operating, and Panoro. And essentially there we have a discovery made back in 1988, the AJ1 well, which found oil, 36 API oil. And this oil was what we're going to be following up with our next well called Gazania 1. We are currently planning to drill early next year. We are fully carried through that particular well. So we're very excited about that as part of our portfolio, and it's got very low risk. We have a chance of success of 59% because we have oil in the basin. And this particular block is, again, very similar to what we have in Uganda and Kenya. It's a rift block, slightly older than that particular trend, but the same kind of concept, the fluvial sands trapped within a graben. And then, of course, our star performer, which is our block 11B, 12B. As you know, we've just done this deal where we're going to have an interest increasing to 10%, operated by Total, being very, very good in their operations. They've managed to secure the same rig we had in 2019. And we're currently drilling, as you know, the Leopard 1 well. That's what we're currently doing in that particular block. But I'll go into more detail on that later in terms of the technical aspects of that particular block.
Thanks, Jan. This slide shows you the recent transaction we announced on 11B, 12B. Obviously, we're very excited about the potential on this block with Total, and so we're more than doubling our interest. We originally set up a local joint venture to farm into the block for 10%, and we're now buying out our local partner and their financing with Africa Energy shares. This is a very accretive transaction. Again, more than doubling our interest in our main asset. And it really has two goals. One is to increase our exposure to the block at an attractive valuation ahead of the upcoming drilling results. And two, to simplify the ownership structure to make it easier ultimately to monetize after the drilling results. Here we highlight the quality of the Block 11B, 12B potential. Every year, Wood Mackenzie, an independent consultant, puts together a list of the top prospects to drill in the world. And these are usually very large prospects with major oil and gas companies. Last year, we were on the 2019 list with Brulpada, again with Total at Block 11B, 12B. That was a discovery. This year, we're on the list again with Leopard offshore South Africa, currently drilling. And I imagine the next prospect to be drilled at 11B, 12B, Blasup, will likely be added to this list after we drill Leopard. So very unusual for a company our size to have exposure to these type of prospects, and there's a lot of upside. Let me tell you why we're in South Africa. Before I mention the very attractive commercial terms with less than 30% state take, South Africa is, of course, one of the most developed countries in Africa. It has very good infrastructure from the mining sector and has a natural resources culture. Today, there's no oil production in South Africa. There's a small amount of natural gas production off of Mosul Bay. And there's been a history of exploration, but not much success until recently. We had the first deep water discovery with Total at Brulpada. And there's been a lot of activity around that with other companies looking to build a position offshore South Africa. Over the last 3 years, you can see major companies farming in and waiting to see how the Total program develops. You can see we have 2 blocks nearby existing infrastructure, both with existing discoveries. We're going to focus on Block 11B, 12B with Total. This map here shows you why this is such an attractive location to have a gas-related discovery. At Brulpada, we discovered gas condensate, very high-yielding gas condensate, which comes with a lot of liquids, plus light oil. And of anywhere offshore Africa, this is probably the best place to have a gas-related discovery because we have existing infrastructure and existing demand for natural gas at attractive prices nearby. You can see that we have a pipeline 70 kilometers away that goes into a gas to liquids facility that's currently buying gas at attractive prices from the nearby offshore gas production. But that production is declining and will be shut in over the next 6 to 12 months. So that GTL facility is running out of feedstock, and we will be very well placed to supply any gas that we discover here into that facility. Plus, there's a power plant nearby that is currently burning diesel and would very much like to transition to natural gas. And if we have more gas than what Mosul Bay can take, it would be easy to build a pipeline to Port Elizabeth and supply the local industry there. So very attractive location for any natural gas that we produce here. But of course, we also have a lot of upside in the liquids. And you can see the background to this block. It's now a legendary block. Originally, we farmed in only with 2D seismic, and there were 5 giant prospects identified in the southwest corner of the block with all the romance for explorationists: direct hydrocarbon indicators, AVO conformance to structure, flat spots, everything that geologists want to see on seismic, like a textbook case study. We've now drilled the first of those prospects. Brulpada had a discovery last year, and that has de-risked the 4 other prospects. This is like having 5 of a kind that all look the same on seismic and are all very large. We're talking 500 million barrel plus type opportunities that now have 80% plus chance of success. That's unheard of in frontier exploration. So it's been de-risked. We also subsequently shot 3D seismic over the Padavisi fairway there, those original 5 prospects. And very rare here, going from 2D seismic to 3D seismic with the higher resolution, the reservoir thickness and the sand thickness is actually looking better. And so we've been able to confirm our resource estimates. The potential tank here is getting bigger, and there's still a lot more to explore on the block. I'd like Jan to tell you a little bit about his history in this basin, because he's been there for a long time.
Thank you, Garrett. Yeah, I just want to give you some background. If you look at this map, if you look at the western side of the map, you can see there's a label. It's called the Sable oil field, and there's also the RB Oryx oil fields. Those oil fields were discovered in the 90s when I was working at PetroSA, and we always believed there was a model where the sands that we discovered there were channel sands, and these fed into the deeper part of the basin towards the Padavisi fairway. Unfortunately, those days when I was with PetroSA, we could only drill at up to 200 meters of water depth. So this is way beyond what we could do at the time. Now, we always believed that there could be a big depositional system out there, and that had been confirmed with the 2D that was shot, and that's why we wanted to participate. Even on the 2D, as Garrett mentioned, you could see the amplitude response, and you could see there was a shutoff at a certain depth, which is always very good in terms of trying to delineate hydrocarbon accumulation. So that was very exciting, very early on in the 2D. We started looking at this in 2014 already, and we managed to farm in 2018. So that was the history of this particular block. Now the discovery well, Brulpada, initially drilled in 2014 and abandoned because of the bad sea conditions, and it wasn't really the right rig. Total came back with the right equipment and successfully drilled this well very, very efficiently. And we intersected the main target, as you can see on this particular section, the upper zone, which is the main target. We intersected, which is always the best thing to do on the first exploration well. We intersected the contact, because the contact was defined on the 2D where the shutoff was. So we were very clear in terms of finding that contact. We also found that we found gas condensate and an oil leg, which is good. The log is on the right-hand side. It shows you what the net looked like, 34 meters of gas condensate. And essentially, we also had some oil at the bottom, 7 meters of oil pay. So that was very, very good result. We then also went on to drill a deeper target, which is a secondary objective here. And we found, again, gas condensate slightly wetter, but no contact. So we have a gas condensate down to, and the contact is somewhere down dip of that location. But you can see the construct here in terms of the structural elements here. You can see there's a very big ridge to the right of that cross section, a basement ridge, which creates a ponding effect. So the sands have ponded up against that high. And this has been very, very good for all the traps. You'll see all the other traps along this trend have the same configuration. They all have the same response as well. This well was completed successfully, and obviously we've taken that away with us. We had cores across these intervals, so we have a lot of information to take forward. And obviously we couldn't test this well. We didn't have the test equipment on board. So the second well obviously will be tested if successful. So we are ready to evaluate this properly, because these reservoirs have very high porosity permeability. So we anticipate they'll have very good production rates out of these sands. And obviously the quality of sand, the net is very, very high. So, and these submarine fans are very different to what we normally deal with in environments which are closer to shore, which are shallow marine sands. We'll talk about that in the next slide. Here we have the sort of trend across here. This is block 11B, 12B. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the 5 prospects. You can see where Brulpada was drilled, about 75 square kilometers in size. We're going to drill Leopard, which is about 110 square kilometers in size. And you can see there's the location. And there are 3 others that are there in terms of the AVO response. This has been confirmed with the 3D. That red block is where the 3D was acquired. It consists of two 3D surveys, one done by Polakis last year. We shot the new 3D this year, and that's now been merged into one mega volume to be able to identify additional leads. These are additional leads within that 3D. And to the right up there, we've also shot a lot of 2D, very compact, very closely spaced 2D, where we can define the Leopard prospect area. It's very similar to Padafisi. There's a fairway of prospects which need to be evaluated on the new data. What's very exciting is that you have the trend, which obviously we have success at Leopard. We'll move on to Blasop, which is the next one along. And all these prospects, as indicated earlier, all have the AVO response that we are looking for. All have shutoffs, conform to structure, and are thick in terms of the net pay across the closure. These sands extend across the whole fairway, of course, but they're only filled with hydrocarbons in a structural closure position. So that is the way these things work. So there are sands right across the whole area, but we need to have trapping configurations, and those are indicated by the amplitude anomalies we've found. If you compare to Johan's first stop, in terms of the depositional environment there, it's Jurassic as opposed to Cretaceous here. The sands there are shallow marine in terms of the beach type sands, and what we have in Leopard and in the broad area is that you have deep marine fan sandstone. So they're very different formations, but very similar in terms of the productivity and the net that you have within the sequences, because these sands are normally fairly clean, well worked in terms of what you find. So there's a very high chance of success in all these type of plays. Okay, if we move on to the next slide, please. A little bit about the section itself, just to explain to you what this shows. It's a section that runs from west to east across the fairway. Significant here, you can see where Brulpada was located and the two sequences that were tested. And then the Leopard location to the right, where we're slightly deeper water. The important fact here is that because we're in slightly deeper water, the source rock is slightly shallower, so it's slightly cooler and more likely to produce oil. Therefore, we believe there could be more oil in Leopard than there was in Brulpada. That's one of the theories, and this has been supported by a lot of work. So that is important to take note of. The other important thing about Leopard, we have a deep target. Deep target is contingent on the result of Leopard, so it's not out of the picture, and we want to have the option to deepen if we think it's necessary. Now, in terms of the drilling process, I would like to just explain to you, the rig comes onto location. The top section of the well gets drilled open hole, as I say. So you go down to about 400 meters open hole, and that consists of two sections. You have a very large open hole section and then a slightly smaller, so it's a 30 to 20 inch hole when you finish the casing before you run the BOP. And the BOP is the blowout preventer. And to run the BOP takes quite a lot of time, because you need to connect from the ocean bottom to the rig, and that's connected by a huge pipe. And that takes quite a lot of time to run. And that's why the rig moved off location, to be able to run that BOP and get it correct before connecting. Once connected, they do drill on, but on the way to the reservoir, you obviously have points where you do casing, because as you get deeper, the formation pressure increases. You need to keep that pressure back by putting casing in the hole, and that casing is run. It normally takes 5 or 6 days to run the casing, and then we continue down down to the target. So it's quite a process. You just don't drill a number of meters per day. There is a process that needs to be followed to get to the target safely and to protect the well. So that's the process that we follow to get to the bottom and test the reservoir. When we get to the top of the reservoir, obviously, we will then, if it's successful in terms of hydrocarbon bearing, we will then go into coring, and then we will complete the well in the necessary manner to protect the reservoir to be able to test later. Testing is also quite a long process, because obviously you need to do a number of flow tests, and those take quite a long time. You do short ones in the beginning, and you have to shut in for periods of time, and then do a long one in terms of see what the reservoir performance is like. So, it does take up to 30 days, 35, maybe a bit longer days to do the test. So that's the duration for the well. So that's why we'll release some results hopefully by early November, but that's the earliest I think you might hear anything from us at this point. And then we have to do obviously testing after. That's what we go through. The other point make here, you can see Blasop to the right there. So if we have Leopard successful, which we have 80% chance of happening, obviously if that's successful, Blasop would be like 95% chance of success. So it'll be another test, slightly shallower again in terms of formation depth, again more into the oil window. So it'll probably get more oily as you go towards the east. So that's why we're so excited about this block. It's got huge potential. And as I said earlier, there's lots of other prospects we can go for in this particular area. So it's got a lot of upside. All right, thank you.
Okay, just a quick view at where we've been over the last 12 months. Clearly a difficult environment for oil and gas companies, but we continue to execute. The stock price is up 60, 70%. And despite the backdrop of COVID and the oil price downturn, we've been preparing for a drilling program that, again, can more than double our net asset value. And we're now drilling and have a series of wells coming up where you can see that we're going to have a lot of news flow over the next 2 quarters with potentially 4 wells, all fully funded between Block 11B, 12B, and our other block in South Africa, Block 2B, that has the carried well. In summary, we have net exposure to hundreds of millions of barrels of prospective resource. And because we're in a country with very attractive commercial terms, where the net present value of a discovered barrel is very high, at $50 oil, it's about $5 per barrel in South Africa for discovered resource. Even if you discount that to $3 or $4, if we potentially have 10% of Block 11B, 12B, and 27.5% of Block 2B, with hundreds of millions of barrels of prospective resource. Remember, the Total block has multi-billion barrel potential. This is potentially multiples of our current market cap when you do the math. So there's a lot of potential upside, and we're going to know very quickly over the next several months how the drilling program progresses. We believe that each well has a high chance of success, as Jan explained, and that this is an unusual opportunity for a small cap explorer in a frontier location. We have probably the best technical team for Africa with a track record that speaks for itself, and probably the best shareholders for this type of small cap exploration vehicle in the Lundin Group that's been very supportive, as you saw just recently in our $28 million private placement, where they contributed and committed to more than their pro rata. And I think this is a great time to be a small explorer as the majors are cutting their spending programs and turning away from exploration. Some are not, like Total's being very aggressive with Block 11B, 12B. I think they see a larger ESG story in terms of developing the gas and replacing coal and diesel in South Africa, but the upside is in the liquids, and we're right there with them over the next 6 to 12 months. So I think it's a must-own stock. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Garrett and Jan. This is certainly a very exciting story, and I think it's fair to say that the world is watching Africa Energy and what's going on right now offshore South Africa. I'm glad to say that we have received a few questions, even though I think it was a very comprehensive presentation. And I think we just launch right into them. I'll put them to you, Garrett, and you decide if you want to answer or pass it on to Jan. And the first question is from a shareholder who would like to know when we can expect an update around the 3D campaign on Brulpada from Total.
Good question. So we've now received the fully processed seismic data from the 2D campaign and the processed fast-track data from the last 3D campaign. We won't receive the fully processed 3D data until probably early next year, maybe January. But we're now busy, Jan and our technical team are busy mapping up the leads and prospects. And we can't comment on what or when Total will disclose information about Block 11B, 12B. But of course, we hope to provide anything that's material to our shareholders as quickly as possible. Jan, you want to talk more about what you're seeing on the seismic and what the process is going forward?
Yeah, right, Garrett. Yeah, the 3D quality is very good. We are looking at it, as Garrett was saying, we are interpreting it. We obviously will look at it in a lot of detail, trying to assess the volumes and looking at the, very important, of course, is the velocity and the depth of the top of the reservoir, which is obviously uncertain right now until we actually penetrate. For example, in Leopard, we do know it is in Brulpada. So the whole model has to be adjusted to take that into account. So there's a lot of work still needs to be done before we can actually make a comment on that. And we wait on Total. Obviously, they're going to be looking at it in a lot of detail, but we will look at it as well and come with an opinion and debate with them when it's time to discuss these updates. So yeah, we're actively involved in looking at that in detail.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you, Garrett. We have another question. Actually, there are quite a few questions coming in now, so we'll remain here for a while, which is good.
Great.
So, what the whole drilling the question, and as the 2D and 3D results are as good as they are.
Robert, can you repeat the question? You broke up there for a second.
Yes, of course. What are the chances of can you hear me? What is the risk of a dry hole on Leopard?
So, as we've said, this fairway of prospects has been de-risked by the discovery, Brulpada, and the subsequent 3D seismic work. So we believe that these prospects have 80% plus chance of success. That means chance of finding hydrocarbons. And the main question is it more gas condensate and light oil like we found at Brulpada? And how much is there? So I think it's relatively low risk as frontier exploration goes. And we're hoping for more oil as we move east in the fairway. But even if we find base case the exact same mix of gas condensate and light oil that we found at Brulpada, we more than double our net asset value. This is very valuable gas condensate that trades at a $2 premium to Brent, high yielding gas condensate with a lot of liquids, and very high API light oil. And so, again, with the commercial terms in South Africa, any discovered barrels are very valuable. And as you can see on the map in the presentation, Leopard is the largest prospect in that fairway of 5 prospects. To put that in perspective, Brulpada is about 75 square kilometers. Leopard's about 110 square kilometers, so at least 50% bigger. And we think there's a northern extension that we see on the recent seismic that could make Leopard potentially 30% bigger than we originally estimated. So even if we find exactly what we found at Brulpada, this is a very exciting exploration well that has a high chance of success.
Thank you. And the next question is whether, if you are successful at Leopard, why don't you go directly to Brulpada? Why do you need to drill Blastop?
Jan, you want to address that?
Yeah, I'll address that. Yeah, it's a good question, but it's really to do with the stage of the data interpretation. The 2D has only just arrived across that area. It needs to be worked extensively before we get to a prospect status. It requires a lot of analysis, and it's a slightly different animal out there. It's a slightly different sequence. It does have AVO anomalies, so it does look like similar type of fairway, but Total would want to do a lot more work before they would put it forward to the joint venture as a prospect. So it's essentially just an area where there's a number of leads, whereas Blaasop is way beyond that. We're a prospect status. They've done all the work in terms of drilling. They've designed the well. So that's, it's at a different maturity stage. So it's really just a level of that. We had 3D across Blaasop a long time ago as well. So it's just, we have to wait to go through the process and decide whether it's worth drilling or not. And, the indications are good at this point to go forward with it, but it's early days yet. But it is something that needs to be tested, I agree, but not right now.
Thank you. And there are also quite a lot of questions around the Leopard results and when they will be presented. So is it early November after testing, or will it be already in October? That's already been mentioned, but I think it's worth repeating.
Yeah, I think the best example is the Brulpada well. Remember, we spud the Brulpada well. We started drilling at the end of December 2018 and announced results in the beginning of February 2019. It was about a 60-day well. Leopard is very similar. And as Jan explained, we'll have 2 points where potentially we can announce results. In the success case, we would drill down to total depth with the coring and logging analysis and hopefully announce that, just like we did with Brulpada, and then flow test for several weeks and have a second announcement about those results. So our expectation is that we'll be able to announce by the end of October or beginning of November the first part, and then we'll test through November and have another announcement by the end of November. Of course, this process is driven by Total as the operator, and we defer to them in terms of the disclosure. But whatever's material for our shareholders, we will announce as soon as possible.
And the next question is a shareholder here who was surprised to see that the deep sea Stavanger rig has been booked by Aker BP for Norway in Q3 of 2021. Could another drilling rig be used, or is the deep sea Stavanger unique?
The deep sea Stavanger is relatively unique. It's one of a handful of semi-submersibles that can handle this offshore environment with the wind, waves, and current, like the North Sea, like west of Shetlands. But we have at least 300 days under the current contract, and the Aker BP new contract that was announced not starting until Q3 next year still gives us the potential, I believe, to extend that contract in the success case. So I think we'll at least get the original plan here of up to 3 wells, and we have some flexibility if the results merit extending the contract. So I think it's actually good news. It gives us visibility on what potentially we're going to have to fund in the future. Having a rig full time for several years would be very expensive for a small cap explorer like us. And we're now funded for this program. I believe we can prove up a lot of resource and then look to monetize without having to further dilute shareholders to keep up with Total.
And what was the trigger that recently made you increase your part in the coming drilling program? Was it Brulpada?
Yes, obviously we've gotten a lot of information over the last 2 years since we farmed in. We farmed in 2018, and we drilled Brulpada, had a discovery there, had all the information from that well in terms of coring, logging, pressure, volume, temperature analysis, had subsequent 2 phases of 3D seismic and the additional 2D seismic. So I think the collection of that data confirmed our initial belief in the potential for this block, the multi-billion barrel potential. And we felt it was a great way to create shareholder value by doubling or more than doubling our interest ahead of this upcoming drilling program at an attractive valuation.
And there is also a question about the funding for the coming wells to be drilled. Can you confirm that you have enough funding, or shall we expect further capital raises over the medium term if you want to drill all the prospects?
So remember, we did a private placement in February or end of January this year, originally for $25 million to fund the 4.9% effective interest in Block 11B/12B for up to 3 wells. We've now potentially doubled or more than doubled that interest to 10%, and our funding commitments are increasing in direct correlation with that increase in working interest. So we've recently completed another private placement of $28 million and believe we're fully funded for up to 3 wells with Total. And we've farmed out our other Block 2B for the Gazea well, where we're fully carried. So the up to 4 wells that we're talking about over the next 2 quarters should be fully funded.
And of course, we get a lot of questions about the ongoing drilling of Leopard, and some of them I know will be very difficult to answer at this point in time. But we have one from an initiated shareholder here asking, when you're drilling Leopard, are you seeing similar sediment pressure, etc., compared to Brulpada?
I think it's too early to say, but Jan, I'll let you address that.
We're obviously drilling the same formation. We're about 40 kilometers away from the first well in a deep marine environment. So the sedimentology is very, very similar. It's not that far away, and sequences are very similar. And drilling is at the same rate, and we're having no problems in terms of going through the formation. But that's all I can really tell at this point. We're obviously going through the process of drilling the well. We have to do the necessary to keep things confidential. But there's no big change over that distance in terms of what we expect. So the first major event will be the primary target. So that's what we'll hit first before we have anything else to report on.
I think we'll stay with you, Jan, because we have a very technical question here. Have Total's new supercomputer, Pangea 3, been involved in the background calculating of the Leopard, Blasop, and Brulpada?
I can comment on that. Essentially, they use that computer a lot for, not purely that, but they use it a lot for processing the seismic data. They have certain routines that they do special processing on the data, which is obviously proprietary to Total, and they make use of that machine to do those processes. They share the results with us. We discuss it. We obviously they have a competitive advantage by having that machine, and they utilize it, for the JV, which is we're very grateful for. And that's all they do with it. And they basically have very, very complex algorithms they run, and the results obviously help in deciding where we drill, how we drill, and picking locations and so on. So it's very useful to have that technology in-house. That's what we use it for. They use it for. Not so much on volumes and stuff like that, more on the actual data itself, the 3D and the 2D.
So I think we'll conclude with the last 2 questions here. And one of them is about what happens with Block 11B/12B in May 2022. Can it be prolonged in the case of success?
So in South Africa, the exploration right typically has 3 2-year periods. We're now entering the 3rd 2-year period, which has been approved and will expire in September now 2022 for Block 11B/12B. There's also talk about a potential 4th 2-year period in the new petroleum bill discussions, but it's too early to say. Under the current regime, Total would have to declare commerciality, take a final investment decision, and apply for the production right before the final period of the exploration right expires in 2022. 2022.
Thank you, Garrett. And the last question here is definitely for Jan. Can you describe the prospectivity of the eastern section of 11B, 12B, where the 3D seismic was extensively conducted?
The eastern area that was shot, essentially the 3D area, or were you asking about the 2D area? The 3D area covers Blasop, and it covers the eastern portion of the Brulpada fairway. So that's where the 3D is. The 2D to the right over Leopard is obviously a new fairway, and that's very interesting. It extends the prospectivity very far to the east and opens up a completely new play, which is something that we hadn't seen before. And obviously, when you shoot new data and you see new things, it's quite exciting. It was first seen on lines which were 10 kilometers apart, so it was a very widely spaced data set. And obviously, with the new survey, the 2D survey, we got that down to 2.5 kilometers by 2.5 kilometers. So it's a very tight grid. And remember, we drilled Brulpada on a 2.5 by 2.5 kilometer grid. So a very similar grid we drilled that well on. So it's not unfamiliar for Total to make a drilling decision based on 2D alone, just to prove up the play concept, rather than go and shoot 3D and have that expense. The 3D can come later if you have success, particularly this type of water depth. So it's a slightly unconventional way of doing things, but it worked, and I think it could work here as well. So I think I answered your question, hopefully.
Thank you, Jan. It certainly did. And with that, I would like to conclude today's presentation and thank all the participants for joining us in this first Africa Energy virtual town hall meeting. I think this is a very good format, and we will certainly be getting back with more of these presentations when we have news to talk about. And in the meantime, you can see on your screens where to reach us, and please reach out if you have any questions, and we will try to answer them. Otherwise, exciting times ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.